Cindy.
Thanks, Kathy. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk a little bit about some of the ways that the PRCA has worked with not only the horse industry, but just about any other animal use industry regarding livestock welfare issues, animal welfare issues, crisis management, government relations, anything that kind of relates to that. And as Kathy mentioned, I've been at the PRCA 19 years and 4 months, not that I'm counting. And I've seen a lot. So that being said, I'm moving on in about a month. So this is one of my last presentations. I'm moving to Oregon to run the St. Paul, Oregon Rodeo. So kind of excited to move on, but enjoyed what I've done, not only within the horse industry, but the PRCA. So we'll talk a little bit about, I think everybody knows what the PRCA is. These are just some of our facts and figures about how many members we have, how many million fans we have. That's done with a demographic research, how much prize money, and that we are the largest sanctioning body for pro rodeo. Obviously, this is our Super Bowl right here. The PRCA recently signed a contract to keep the National Finals Rodeo in Las Vegas through 2025, which was a big deal. And one of the things that I felt was so interesting about this is animal issues really did not come up in this contract. We had two other places that were bidding for this, and we ended up raising our prize money about $4 million a year and getting a really good contract to stay in Las Vegas. So hopefully the foundation we've laid for animal issues has allowed rodeo to get this wonderful contract and stay in Las Vegas and really take rodeo to the next level. Obviously, these are our challenges and obstacles, not only in the horse industry, but all animal industries. Public perception. And what I tell everybody is public perception, you know, they come to one event and see an animal, you know, run up against a fence, or a calf injured, or any number of things they can see training in the back pens at a horse show. That is going to be their reality for that event. So we have to be very careful about what the public sees at our events. And the bottom line is that we have to be very careful what we do, not just careful what they see. So if you don't want it on the front page of the paper, don't do it. Because once someone from the public that has no idea what we do with livestock or horses sees something like that, then that's it. We're not going to reconvince them. Obviously, the animal rights groups are a problem. One of the things that I've learned in my many years at the PRCA is we have to focus on our issues, and they are absolutely going to be there. They are not going away. What we do can make their job easier or harder. And I'm going to go into how we have dealt with these issues and what seems to be successful. They've never quite gone away from the sport of rodeo, but they have moved on to different targets because we've kind of learned some of the lessons dealing with them. Obviously, the legislative and regulatory issues are huge. And if we don't keep our sport legal, and if we have negative regulatory issues coming up and we don't address those, then we're in deep trouble. And obviously the division of the industry, and that is within any animal industry, especially the horse industry, and we've seen that with the horse processing issue, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we have to have a united front. When those that don't like our industry see that we are divided in any way, they know they have a way to get in and affect us negatively. And clearly, I know all of you know the difference between animal rights and animal welfare, but I know the general public doesn't know this. And the lines have clearly been blurred on the difference between animal welfare and animal rights in the public's mind anyway. I think it's pretty clear to us that we believe we have the right to interact with our animals as long as we treat them with proper care and handling. But when you get to animal rights, and they equate use with abuse. No matter what we do, they don't, as long as we're using animals, and especially making money using animals, they really feel like that's abuse. And a lot of people will come to you and think they're an animal rights activist, and they're truly not. They're more animal welfare. So it's kind of up to us to educate the media, our legislators, our constituents, people in the horse industry, the difference between these two philosophies, and get more people on board for our animal welfare philosophy, and helping us make people understand that. Well, clearly I'm not going to be able to go through this talk without talking about what just recently happened. And this was a shocker. There's no doubt about it. A lot of people had ridden on the coattails of Ringling Brothers for a long time. And Kenneth Feld, who owns Ringling Brothers, spent a lot of money fighting the animal rights activists. And he did everything he could. And a couple of years ago, there was a huge court case that people were really saying, oh, this is a win. Ringling Brothers won in court against the animal rights activists. They won, $10 million or a lot of money from the activists. One of the things that you have to, and we'll talk a little bit more about exactly what happened with Ringling Brothers, is I don't think you're ever really going to win if you go to court. And if you look back with the cattlemen and Oprah Winfrey and those types of things, once it gets to court, you're the only people that are going to win probably are the lawyers in that. And this closing of Ringling Brothers puts us all at a huge amount of risk and should scare the heck out of anybody that has any animal. And I'm going to do a little case study of Ringling Brothers later. So are we next? I mean, I think, it's pretty clear we see what's going on with the soaring of horses, horse racing, medication issues. The carriage horse industry has and continues to be under attack. And obviously the horse slaughter has been a huge issue within our within our industry that we really haven't been able to clearly define, how we're going to solve those problems. And one of the things that we have learned through the years at the PRCA is once your industry, and this goes back to Ringling Brothers too, once your industry is regulated by the federal government, it's too late. So the Tennessee walking horse industry is obviously in deep decline and has not been able to figure out how to solve their issues internally. The racehorse industry is struggling to figure that out and is seeking federal legislation on that. And I'm very, very concerned. I think that we need to be very careful that we do everything we can to self-enforce and to figure out what our issues are and to solve them before it gets to any sort of federal legislation or regulation. Obviously, these are some of the tactics that we see from the animal rights extremist groups, and I've dealt with every single one of them. They want to divide and conquer. We talked about that. They want to recruit youth. You'll see, PETA, your mommy kills animals, trying to get the kids on their side. And as we know, kids don't understand where their food or anything like that comes from. Domestic terrorism hasn't been in the news as much recently, but the trucks down there on the right-hand bottom corner at Harris Ranch in California were torched a couple of years ago at a feedlot. I think the undercover investigations, that's gotten easier with cell phones and everything. The court action, that's what closed our plants here in the U.S. with horse slaughter, so we're all familiar with that. In the sport of rodeo, we're very familiar with them targeting the corporations that sponsor our industry, and that can be very, very detrimental, and that's happened with both SeaWorld and Ringling Brothers. The media manipulation to me is always something that I don't know that people always see what happens, but if you see the billboard, nobody likes an 8-second ride down there at the bottom, that was something that PETA would submit to billboard companies when a rodeo was coming to town. And the billboard companies would obviously say, that's too risque, we're not going to run that. So PETA would put out a press release saying that, their rights were violated, they wouldn't run the ad, and then they would go on to say how rodeo was cruel to animals, and then the paper would print all of that. So they would never have to pay for the billboard. They would just get their information out to the media that way. And clearly with the legislative action, we've seen all of that with the number of state, local, and federal issues we've been dealing with recently. And then you look back at what we talked about, all the tactics in campaigns, and that's what we dealt with the horse processing issue. Clearly, it's based on emotion, not facts. You know, there's no nothing in there to take care of the horses that we're going to be left with here in the U.S. if they're to close the borders. They were successful in dividing the industry. They did start with regulation, and I remember back in 1996, 7, they worked with the horse industry, and all, you know, the activists said, we don't want to stop horse slaughter, we just want to make sure the horses are transported safely. And as we know, once they get that passed, then they'll say those laws aren't being enforced now, we need to move on to a ban. They did burn down the plant in Oregon, and the one in Illinois also burned down. At the beginning of this was about reclassifying horses, and we know exactly what they were trying to do at that point. And we were successful in teaching the horse industry that this is a death knell to the horse industry if we get them reclassified. And whenever I talk about this to horse people, I say this is not about eating horses at all.
I think if they're not somebody else.
It's clearly about their vegan agenda, and if they could get horses banned as human consumption, then they would certainly move on to pigs and sheep and those types of things. So we saw all of that, and we have managed to keep the borders open, but I think we'll see some interesting things happen now that what's going on in Washington, D.C., but there's also some other issues with that. So let's talk a little bit about what happened with Ringling Brothers. They were a major target of activists. They were regulated fairly heavily by the Animal Welfare Act, so USDA APHIS. They regularly inspected them, and you would think, okay, we're going to have USDA inspectors come, and they're going to report, you know, and it's going to be under Freedom of Information Act that our animals are well taken care of. That would help you out. Well, obviously that isn't the case. That it doesn't help you at all. Ringling Brothers is still playing a huge part in the conservation of endangered elephants, and they have a huge elephant conservation center. And as I talked about, they had their big win in court against the animal rights activists. And they did win that battle, but unfortunately they lost the war. And when they won that court battle, animal rights activists redoubled their efforts to ban the use of what they call the bull hook on elephants in all these different cities. And once they start getting these city ordinances against your activity, you know, it's nearly impossible to go across the country. They finally said, we can't fight all these local ordinances. We're going to take elephants out of the circus. And no one went to the circus after they did that. So they announced that come May that they will not have any more circuses. So very sad, but very important to see the progression of what happened. Again, there's another activity with animals that we've really seen awry, you know, what's happening with them. And the activists have really targeted them. And one of the things that's really important to note with Ringling Brothers and SeaWorld, they're both for-profit corporations. And if you're using animals in a for-profit, any type of business, they have an easier time of targeting you. And when I talk about the rodeo and horse industry, we do have a little bit easier of a time with it because we have more of a grassroots following. You might go to the circus, but are you going to go testify at a federal hearing to save the circus? Probably not. But if they're trying to ban one of our activities, whether it be rodeo, when we get a rodeo ordinance come up, we're going to bring in a lot of very polite, well-dressed, starched high school rodeo kids, and they're going to talk to those legislators, and the legislators are going to go, whoa, wait a minute. These are great kids. I believe what they're saying. So both SeaWorld and Ringling have a tough time. SeaWorld being a publicly traded company, Ringling Brothers was owned by the Feld family. They have really got a problem. And they did lose, this one quarter, they lost $25.4 million after this documentary of Blackfish came out. So here's kind of the progression of what happened at SeaWorld. They're a publicly traded company. They're also federally regulated by USDA APHIS. Huge target of activists. A trainer was killed by a whale, which allowed the activists to use that against them. The movie Blackfish came out, and it was not a big movie until CNN showed it. And once CNN put it in the rotation, then thousands of people saw it, and it's amazing. People will watch that and believe exactly what it says. There's one part, I didn't watch the whole thing, but I saw part of it where they were weaning a 5-year-old calf from its mother. And of course the calf was crying and the mother was crying. And I actually saw rodeo people on Facebook complaining about that. And I was astonished that they couldn't walk out their door and see that we wean calves and colts every day at a much younger age and understand this was a 5-year-old calf. But it was very well done. It was a propaganda piece. It really hurt SeaWorld a lot. They hired a PR firm, which when you deal with animal issues, when you hire a PR firm, you might be in trouble because many times they're not going to understand how to exactly deal with these issues. They have recently announced they're phasing out breeding of killer whales and killer whale shows at their parks. And just a little bit of information that they put out there, and this was from their PR firm, and I wanted to show you why I think their campaign failed. So say you're a person that never saw Blackfish, and you got on their website, SeaWorld.com, and saw this, what they are saying about Blackfish. Why Blackfish is propaganda, not a documentary. Then they go on to say exactly what Blackfish said is bad, and then say it's not true. So people that never knew what Blackfish was saying now do know what Blackfish said. And all they're gonna remember is that Don Brancho got killed and SeaWorld is defensive. So to me, this is a little bit of a lesson in PR on kind of how not to handle these animal issues. And I'll move forward a little bit on how we have dealt with them. So why are these campaigns so successful? Obviously, people are so removed from the farms. You guys know that better than I do. People think their animals are companions. They don't ever even, this was my dog Toby at the dinner table. Clearly, he doesn't need a job. He's hungry. I'm putting all these human emotions on him. Give him a plate. We have done that ourselves. The general public just clearly can't grasp the fact that we can use animals and not abuse them. And one of the things that I don't think the public really gets is when an animal is used in a profit-making enterprise, as long as that enterprise has the guidelines that we're talking about, they possibly and probably get better care because they do have a purpose and they have a value. And many animals that are discarded they have become unusable and that type of thing. So it's something that can be, I think, turned around. And most people think in the public these days, they just lump all of this animal welfare and animal rights stuff together, and obviously think the Humane Society of the United States is the same as your local animal shelter. So what do we need to do to move forward? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what PRCA has done. Obviously, we have got to have strategies to deal. Number one, and this is always number one, and this is what I've learned, is it's not a PR campaign. It's not an animal rights campaign. Job number one is to make sure the health and the welfare of the animals in our industry are taken care of. If you do that first and every decision you make is based on that, then that's what the public, legislators, the media, everybody expects from you and hopes from you. So that's job number one of ours. We obviously have to look at the public's opinion of our industries. We have to address critic groups in some way, and obviously the media. And in these days, fake media is a problem and needs to be somehow dealt with. So what I did learn was, rather than answering every letter to the editor and debating animal rights activists, we sure needed to figure out what our livestock welfare program was doing, how we were going to move it forward, and how we were going to make it better. Because clearly status quo is not going to work in society anymore. We have to move forward and make things better all the time. So here's how the PRCA does that. Obviously, we have 60 rules for the care of and handling of the livestock. We monitor the compliance of those rules and the effectiveness of those programs, because the worst thing you can do is have a rule and not enforce it, and not have a way to prove you're enforcing it, and that there's a reason for that rule for the welfare of the animals, not just PR purposes. We do monitor the compliance, and I'll talk about how we do that. We proactively reach out to elected officials, law enforcement, and the media. We're always trying to feed stories. We're always continuing our relationship with elected officials, whether it's locally through our committees or federally. We have a lobbyist in DC. And law enforcement is very important, as we know these days also, when they're getting a lot of pressure from people that don't understand horses and livestock. And it seems like they're always in a position of whether it might be over enforcement or under enforcement. And we as an industry need to support them and give them information to help them. So we need to educate our committees, our judges, our members on best practices. And we're always up in the ante. We're always creating new programs, not just resting on our laurels. And we do have a livestock welfare committee that's been around for a long time. We have 2 people that have been inducted into our Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame just for their efforts in livestock welfare. And media relations, meaning dealing with some of the things that might come up, some of the more what I call crisis communications. So this is the backbone of our program, our judging program. And if our judges aren't any good and they're not enforcing our rules, then we're toast. And we have all the records to prove that they are. And if they don't, we talk to them about it. If someone comes to us and says, we saw a rule being violated, we can go to our judge's sheet and see that they have turned that rule in. Or if any member sees a rule being violated outside the judge's purview in the arena, anywhere on the grounds, they can turn that in also. The biggest thing that the PRCA ever did was require a veterinarian on site. And we don't advocate this for every rodeo because there aren't enough veterinarians. But as the PRCA and the largest sanctioning body of pro rodeo, in 1995, we started having veterinarians on site. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that has helped us. The judges fill out reports and send them back to the office, and our rodeo committees get copies of that. And oftentimes there'll be suggestions on how they can do things better as far as the welfare of the livestock. This has been the backbone since before I got to the PRCA 19 years and 4 months ago, not that I'm counting. We have surveys that show that the livestock are being cared for, and that there is a very low rate of injury. And this, on top of the stories of where the livestock come from and some of the more emotional things, this helps give cover to legislators. This gives the media the information they need from veterinarians, because we've learned that veterinarians are the ones that people trust. And when we have them on site and they are sharing this knowledge and they're giving us back information, then that adds a lot of value to not only our program, but then for the media, for legislators and the public to feel like, okay, their program really is working. And you can see when we deal with those numbers, it's averages 0.0005, the rate of injury to rodeo livestock. I talked a little bit about the elected officials and how important it is to be proactive. And we have a fundraiser at the National Finals Rodeo and have some of the most important leaders in agriculture in the Congress, and they bring a lot of lobbyists to Vegas for the weekend, and we give them behind the scenes tours and introduce them to stock contractors and contestants in Miss Rodeo America and show them equipment. And they all have a great time. They see the Super Bowl of rodeo and they go back to DC and they advocate for us. And this has been a turning point for us, because we know that the critic groups know that we do this, and they know that Senator Barrasso and Frank Lucas and Chairman Conaway and Senator Heller and those are at our rodeo, and they see how our livestock really is treated. And that definitely probably moves them onto a different target and gives us a lot of friends in Congress, which we already had. We just had to figure out who they were. I talked a little bit about animal control and law enforcement, and if we don't share our information with them, they don't have it. And we've done some training with animal control and law enforcement and worked with our Bureau of Animal Protection here in Colorado. And I've put together materials that can be used elsewhere to educate law enforcement on the sport of rodeo, where the animals come from. And this gal on a bull is actually an animal control officer who came to our training. And those are the types of things they will remember. And they got to talk to veterinarians that had been at rodeos and got to see the animals up close and actually see a rodeo. So that was very important for us. Being prepared. And again, that goes back to what I talked about with the one fan that might come and see an injury at our rodeo, or the media if you have a biosecurity issue at your rodeo and you haven't prepared at all for that. We work very hard to educate our rodeo committees on making sure they're ready for that injury. And that's really hard to do, because it is very rare that it happens. And to put a lot of stuff into place for something that very seldom happens sometimes might seem like overkill. But when that one injury does occur and it is handled professionally, then the fans can leave and realize that, they do take the livestock welfare seriously. And if it is not handled correctly, those fans will leave and probably never come back to another rodeo if they're not really familiar with the sport. So very important. And the biosecurity measures too, that is something that's just really come into play in the last, I don't even know how many years, but when we've seen the EHV, and it's happening right now, to have a plan, to be in touch with your state veterinarians, all of those types of things were things that our rodeos had never thought of. But again, the public, and especially the horse industry, is going to be very angry at these rodeos if they're not taking it seriously and don't have a plan in place if there is an outbreak. And this came into play a few years ago at Cheyenne when they found a horse that had vesicular stomatitis on the premises. And had that not been handled very quickly and efficiently and with the state veterinarian, it could have absolutely closed down the entire sport of rodeo, because those people from Cheyenne were leaving and going all over the country. It was handled very well and it didn't spread. So it pays to be prepared both for injuries as well as contagious animal diseases. When we talk about new programs and being proactive, this has probably been one of the biggest ones that we've done in recent years. And I had this thought in my mind many years ago that we have volunteer veterinarians on site at our rodeos, and that we needed to get their story out. And so we teamed up with Zoetis, and we give a Zoetis PRCA Veterinarian of the Year award every year. It's a huge deal for those that win it, the rodeo committees that nominate them. Last year it was a veterinarian that had done more for contestants' horses. And what that allows us to do is get a positive story out to the media without talking anything about animal rights or injuries or anything, but it allows us to talk about all of the volunteer veterinarians on site. And then they give these amazing stories about the livestock and how much they enjoy interacting with rodeo folks because they take such good care of their animals. So again, just a positive, proactive program. Obviously, the media is a huge, huge issue when you're talking about animals, especially in this day and age. And these two examples I have here come from Salinas, California, where we've had big issues with animal rights activists, and we did end up in court and a lot of things. So what we did was the activists were going after the sponsors, and they were going after the media very hard. So we turned that around to be very positive. We hosted a sponsor reception behind the scenes the Tuesday before the rodeo started. It's rodeo in California, in Salinas, not rodeo. And then we invited the media, any of them that wanted to come, Wednesday morning and Thursday morning. Come see all the animals, ask any of the questions you want to ask, and we'll set up interviews, we'll do whatever you want. Over on the left, there's a veterinarian who was a former competitor but was working in Dubai on horses, and he had interned in Salinas and flew back every year to be the veterinarian at the rodeo that year. Made for a wonderful story and completely positive and proactive. And then on the right is a reporter feeding a little hay to Eugene, which was a bucking horse colt that had its own Facebook page and was more famous than a lot of the human athletes. So we were able to say, come ask any questions. And then once the activists revved up towards the start of the rodeo, their questions weren't answered, and they were able to say, we saw how the animals were taken care of, and we didn't see any problems back there. And we asked, and they opened it up for us. So being proactive with the media really turned around, because what we've learned in the PRCA is if the activists can't get media, then they don't get donations. And a lot of this is a money-driven donation system with activists. So I think we're about clear with the activist problem in Salinas. It was along about 6 or 7 years. So again, we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when they do come after you, and how you react to it changes the outcome of that. So we're talking about EHV1 at the fairgrounds, at a racetrack. We've recently had a horse come down sick at a huge barrel race. We're watching that. They've shut down some high school rodeos in Nevada. There were a couple of horses that ran into the fence in Fort Worth, Texas this year that caused a lot of media issues there. So how do you handle these? These are the issues, these are the ways that we have taught our committees and how we handle it at the PRCA. There needs to be one designated spokesperson. It would always be, when you call the PRCA, if you mentioned animal, you would talk to me. If you start transferring someone around the building, they're going to get a lot of different answers, and you have to have that continuity. You need to know what the critic groups are saying about your industry, and obviously prepare positive, proactive points without repeating those negative things. A real good tip that I've learned when I get a call from a reporter that I don't know anything about is you Google that reporter. Often if so-and-so says, I'm Karen from the St. Louis Star or whatever, oh, Karen, and I want to talk about livestock welfare. I will answer that, wow, that'd be great. Let me, I'm heading into a meeting now. Let me get your name and number, and I'll call you back. And then I Google that person. And when I find out they've done all of these stories about how terrible the meat industry is, or Ringling Brothers or something like that, I realize what I'm dealing with, and I can be a lot more prepared for that. I'm also a big student of how individuals and corporations handle controversial issues in the media, and see what I think works as far as handling those. And I'm going to talk about this a lot utilizing written statements is a hugely important thing to do when you have a controversial issue coming up. And I'll talk a little bit about more what should be in those statements. And when I get a reporter that I know is going to try and do kind of a hit piece, and it's a print reporter, I will absolutely ask them to email me the questions, and I will email them back. I'm probably going to have a lot of meetings and conference calls that day, and I'm going to need that person to, but I'd be happy to answer it in writing, because I know that there might not be as tactful of saying what I want said. So if I have it in writing, I know that I'm going to get printed what I actually say. This is how the activists and those that come after our groups want us to react. They want us to react quickly and emotionally. They want us to focus on animal rights. They want us to use their names. We never ever say the names of any animal rights groups in any of our publications. We don't really talk about animal rights. And they also want us to make unfavorable comparisons, or as we say, throw other animal industries under the bus. And I will never do that. So you have to know that these are traps that are going to be set for you. This is how you are going to be successful. You're going to get all the facts. You're going to respond when you're ready and not before then. And there isn't any reason to rush into putting out something that you aren't sure is completely 100% bulletproof. And this is where those carefully written statements that answer all the questions. It may not give them what they want, but it will give them all the information of what happened, what you're going to do. You can, put a little bit about, a quote from the veterinarian, a quote from the animal owner, those types of things. Always tell the truth and always have documentation to back your facts. Share positive facts about your industry. And anytime any reporter asks me about animal rights, I will say, well, I'm glad you asked that, because the general public doesn't understand the difference between animal rights and animal welfare. And we believe in animal welfare, meaning we have the right to interact with those animals as long as we take proper care. Animal rights groups believe in the philosophy of no use, and use equals abuse. And we don't think the general public believes in that. And obviously in this day and age, you better include social media in your response. Our legislative issues are a huge problem, and some things that we're dealing with are, there's a lot of laws out there. The issue fatigue, I have been at the PRCA since 1997, and I've been dealing with the processing of horses for human consumption since I've been here. And a lot of people are just flat sick of it and just don't really know how to solve that. Ballot initiatives are one, especially in a place like here in Colorado or California, where you have large population centers that can vote on an issue where you don't have to have representation in all of the counties. We've seen a lot of problems with mixed issues and proposals, circus and rodeo lumped into one. We are seeing increased regulation, and clearly animal rights groups are funding campaigns. So these are some of the, moving forward onto the proactive things, these are some of the initiatives that the PRCA supports, and we think we can do a better job at getting the information out about these. The Unwanted Horse Coalition is obviously an important issue when not only are we dealing with some of the welfare issues in our industry, but we can go in and say we're dealing with them, and we can talk to our legislators and say the horse industry is working on these issues. It doesn't need to be legislated. And the gelding clinics and the educational materials about responsible horse ownership are a huge deal. And the PRCA understands we can't be in our own little bubble. And Dr. Doug Corey, who's the chair of our Livestock Welfare Committee, is the chair of the Unwanted Horse Coalition, and I'm the chair of the funding committee for this. So we, as an industry, understand we have to stand with the horse industry and find solutions to these problems. Time to Ride is obviously another initiative through the American Horse Council, as is the Unwanted Horse Coalition, that is working to get more people on horses, which we've seen a decline in horse numbers, and we need to try and get that back up. And the unwanted horse lessons are something that if you don't know about those, please go to animalwelfarecouncil.org and go look at those. And they are aimed at the 5th, 6th grade level to teach about some of the underlying issues regarding unwanted horses. And they've been done with a teacher and a child psychologist. They are very well done. Jill Montgomery did those, and can really help get the point across to up and coming horse folks. Humane Watch is something that I think is important, is they're getting out the information about the Humane Society of the United States. The Center for Consumer Freedom has this organization. They also have PETA Kills Animals and some other, and they had the commercial during the Super Bowl. They do a lot of advertising to expose Wayne Pacelli, the Humane Society of the United States, PETA, and all these organizations that are taking the money of a lot of people that think they're helping the animals and not really helping. And we want to steer those people towards organizations that they've looked into and know that locally are really helping horses or animals. I always talk about the future and, you know, where do we go in the rodeo industry and in the horse industry. And this slide to me really demonstrates that, because if you look really closely, can't see too well, but these horses look a lot alike. And these are cloned bucking horses. And I never thought I'd see that in my day. But to me, it shows it's not your grandma's rodeo. You have to deal with a lot of things that our grandparents never had to deal with, but those issues are here. How we handle them will decide whether our industries are around for the next generation. And here's what, to me, the horse industry must do to make sure that we aren't the next circus. We have to ask the right questions about our policies and procedures. And boy, this is a tough one. And I've seen that I think sometimes a lot of rule proposals are passed to try and get activists to back off for PR purposes. They're not enforced, but we better change some of these policies and procedures before we're on Capitol Hill testifying about them. We obviously need to be prepared, and it's human nature when attacked by these activists to just do whatever you can to get them to go away. And that is what they're hoping for, that you will give in, that you'll meet with them, that you'll negotiate with them. The PRCA, we don't negotiate with animal rights activists. We have absolutely nothing in common with them. We want totally different things. We understand that they want to shut down our industry. So we realize that legislators may have to deal with some of those things, but we will do everything we can not to negotiate, not to sit down with them and make people understand what their real goals are. Obviously, it goes back to what I said, always make decisions on what's best for the animals. You never have to second guess your decisions if you make them that way. Building relationships is so important, whether it be with our corporate partners, legislators, the general public, the media, as we know. And in this day and age, it's so easy to think social media is getting your word out, but you can never build a relationship through social media like you do in a face-to-face, attending a town hall of your congressman, going and visiting your congressman, sitting down with media and talking to them. And always be willing to make those changes. Going back to those procedures in our questions, you know, you're not admitting that you aren't doing a good job if you make it better. But you better make it better in these times, because that's what the public expects. And we better focus on animal welfare and not animal rights, because if we spend all of our time focusing on the issues that they do, then and not continuing to expand our programs and tell our story, then they win, unfortunately. That is all I have for now. Are there questions or discussion?
I'm not unmuted here, so we might get a little feedback, but yeah, thoughts, comments, questions, things that some of maybe you guys have run into, or she can help you kind of just, or even, you know, other experiences that you might have run into.
We had an experience at the National High School Rodeo Finals. I can't remember the year. Shaylee, my daughter, was probably a junior. I think Riley Pruitt was a freshman that year, and we all know Riley from being at the NFR this year. He was waiting to go into the box to rope, and someone come up to him and told him his tie down was illegal and it was cruel and he couldn't use it. Well, he was young. He went to try to find another tie down, and it turned out to be someone from the PETA organization. So they are everywhere, and you know, they don't necessarily identify themselves. So I think it is important that we be careful.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I was judging a horse show. This was Corridor Show Paint Show. It was in Oregon, Montana, Idaho. I can't remember exactly one of it. And they had, I mean, and this was, there were no cattle involved. It was just, you know, a basic pleasure horsemanship performance horse show. And the people running the show said they knew that they had had issues with PETA there before. And one of them just kind of recognized a person walking around that says that's a PETA person just because I've seen them before. And the other lady that I was judging with was very, very proactive. And so she just quietly walked up to the show pen, and one or two guys that were riding that, they weren't doing anything unorthodox or anything that anybody would even think about. And she just says, hey, yo, PETA people are here, so just don't do anything. Don't do this, don't do this, because we know that they're here. And just eyes open. And that was nothing more than people riding their horses around, stopping, backing up, turn around. It was nothing that you would get even your thought of something's funky about it. So I think somebody else was going to comment.
I testified in front of the Ohio State Legislature about rodeo years ago. They're trying to stop rodeo in Ohio. But
that was probably a good while ago, because you've been on from Ohio for a good while.
30 years ago. When I was in college, PETA people came to college rodeo in Lincoln. So they've been around a long time.
But I think what Cindy says, and you see other organizations trying to do this, is be on the front end and be proactive. Some people get a little frustrated because some of the breed organizations, what they have come down with, however, they're trying to stay ahead of the curve. And as she said, manage things themselves rather than it going the other way. So, your thoughts, Cindy?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree, and I think the Ohio thing might have even been before my 19 years and 4 months when I started. Not that I'm but absolutely, what we've seen is the more you focus on what you're doing, and boy, they really like when you get emotional, when you get frustrated, when you say their name, when you they don't have a fight if you're not fighting them. If you're just doing your job and being proactive and taking care of your animals, boy, it makes their job really, really hard. And a lot of people have a hard time understanding that they do better if you're not taking care of your animals. And the more that we move forward with what we're doing, and the quicker we do that, and again, the thing of knowing that there's a PETA person's on site is great, but you should always act like there's a PETA person videoing you everywhere you are. And if we can get the mindset of our folks to think like that, and to think, okay, how is the perception of what I'm doing gonna be, and am I doing what's best for this animal at this point in time? And it helps, but you can't, just like you can't run an organization always worried about being sued. You have to put these policies and procedures in place, enforce your rules, and be ready if they do come after and say, and do some sort of edited video or that type of thing, and be willing to say, yes, we know exactly what they're talking about. This is an edited video. It wasn't the whole thing. If they showed the whole thing, that horse was fine. That was just like if they videoed you walking your dog, they could probably edit that down to you pulling it away from a bush or something, or from eating something harmful and say you were, cruel to your dog. So it is a mindset, and it's kind of almost against human nature to not react, but to be proactive. And I have really, really seen that the tide really changed at the PRCA when we really quit discussing them publicly, when we quit saying their name in the media, when we just really started doing some really cool stuff to showcase the livestock. And this picture on the screen right now was one of those. We took veterinarians to Ike Sankey's ranch in Montana, and there was a federal law, and I don't think it's been reintroduced this session, to ban the transport of horses in double-deck trailers, which is a issue that the PRCA decided we were going to take a stand on, because we do transport bucking horses in double-deck trailers quite successfully. And so we took AVMA and AAP representatives to this ranch, and these are yearlings, by the way, these horses, yearling bucking horses. We took them and we put the vets in a trailer, a double-deck trailer, and we loaded horses. And that was extremely successful, and it took a lot of time and coordination, but it really, really changed the mindset of someone that, in thinking of double-deck trailers and the, horses that aren't familiar with them. And, we agree that horses that aren't familiar with that transportation and aren't familiar with each other shouldn't be transported in that. But we decided to take a stand, and this picture was taken that day and went a long way in showing people what we do and how we do it. So those are the things that you take the time to do. And instead of, always being defensive, saying, come on out, we're going to show it to you. We want you to see it. And once they do, then you don't really have to talk anymore. The truth says it right there. And that picture, to me, that those veterinarians were astonished that these were yearlings and I think they wean these horses up there. They wean them before their moms go on the road. So they're like 3 or 4 months, and they wean them together and they put them out in these pastures. And this is what they get, is these really, really big, healthy yearlings. And was a pretty great thing to show. And what we need to do more of in our industry is show, what we are doing behind the scenes. And it's hard to do because we're trying to take care of animals, whereas the other side, they're full-time trying to put us out of business. And they don't necessarily have the type of animals that we have to take care of. So those are some of the stories that we've had to share.
Hey, anything else for anybody?
One of the problems today is everybody has a cell phone too. They can take pictures and videos.
Very sneakily.
Yeah, they can take pictures and videos and skew them the way that they want to skew them.
Right.
Is there any progress on the horse processing plants?
Yes, if there's any progress on the processing plants, our favorite subjects.
Well, and I think that we're going to have to wait a little while and see what happens in DC. Obviously, it's a whole different day. And I think we know it's really, I've always said once they close all the plants in the US, it was really going to be hard to unring that bell. But I think now that Obama is out of office, I'm just going to be frank. We had processing plants that were ready to open, and I know, and people know, that there was no way, no matter what, they were going to stop it through regulation. However, they had to stop it. So those plants aren't ready to open anymore. Those people gave up, obviously, and it's a big monetary. Really what we have to worry about is closing the borders. And now most of the horses are going to Mexico because of the drug residue issues and that type of thing. And we gotta keep track of, and the USDA is no longer counting the horses going across. They're not even keeping those numbers or giving them out anymore. I think it was 150,000 in 2014 or 15. So yeah, I guess all I can say is stay tuned. The EPA regulations were overturned. So I guess we can see what happens next when we get to appropriations, which is where the problem is giving funding to inspectors. And once you get that back, but it's hard to get someone to put enough money into opening a plant when thinking, okay, we can get through these appropriations for the inspectors for 1 year, but then that bill will come up the next year. And will the activists, when there's another election in Congress, will the activists be successful in pulling that funding again? So no progress, but a lot of changes that may be favorable.